Hello and welcome to Simply Raby. I'm your host Ed Raby, and this is the channel which analyzes the question, what is your personal philosophy and how does it apply to your life? And I also share my personal philosophy, and by doing so hopefully give you an example of how to do that. Today I want to talk about studying a book as opposed to reading a book, and give you a few tips on how to do that. I learned how to study books actually in Bible college and seminary because you, of course, focus in on the Bible and you're studying the Bible and you want to get more out of it. So you learn how to use literature techniques in order to get the most out of that piece of literature. And this technique I'm showing today is based on what was called English Bible in seminary at where I was going to seminary. And basically it is a methodical way of breaking down books, okay, and breaking them down into their component parts to make sure that you understand them. But first I want to talk about why it's a little bit more important to study books rather than reading. I know there's a lot of people out there that at the end of the year, I read 52 books this year. And that's always a very impressive number to me. But what I really have the desire to ask is, what did you learn? And how did it apply to your life? And how did it fit into everything else that you know? Are you a better person for reading that book? And so the answers to that question is why you study a book. Because sometimes we read books and we get them wrong. We interpret them wrong because we don't take the time to see if we are interpreting them correctly. I hear this a lot of time with very controversial authors. Somebody will say, used to be one of my favorites was Ayn Rand. And people would say, oh, I hate Ayn Rand, she's just about selfishness. And I said, well, what have you ever read about Ayn Rand that lets you think that way? Well, I just saw the title of her book, or I read a couple chapters in one of her books. And it's like, you don't know what that author is really driving at until you read them completely and study and understand them. And I think a lot of people try to impress people with how many books they read. But I'm more impressed by a person's knowledge and whether or not they gained anything from reading those books. So the first thing you need to understand is, if you really want to get something out of a book, if you really want to understand a book, you got to study it. You can't just read it. And so my encouragement to you is, if you really want to get something out of a book, back off sometime and say, it's not about how many books I read. It's how many books I understand and actually apply to my life. And I think that's a better question to ask and a better way to do things. Now, I'm going to give you a real simple thing that we learned in school. Now, what I learned from, later on from looking at this technique is the person who created this technique is basically just using the same kind of techniques that a lot of scholars use when they approach a piece of literature. So this is not really anything new. I don't even think it's anything copyrighted. It's just somebody showing you how to go through a book. Now, the first stage of studying a book is observation. Probably a good way to start when you're looking at a book is just to read through the book. Okay, congratulations, you've read the book. Okay, now what do I do? Well, you want to observe what it says. What is this book about? What is it trying to tell you? Just observe. An observation of a book is like if 100 people read this book, okay, if 100 people read the book, 90% of them would say this thing about this book, okay? And that's the way you kind of pick up observations, okay? Just observe what it says. And part of that is maybe doing an outline of the entire book and then going back and outlining all the chapters, okay? Because then you're not just reading the book, you're trying to understand how the book is laid out, you're trying to understand what it says, you're asking that question, what did it say? What did this book say? Okay, well then you got to back off a little bit. You've got to ask yourself the question, what does it mean? Okay, what does it mean when this author makes this certain point? Okay, what does it basically what you're looking at is, okay, I know what this says, what does it mean? What does it mean to me? What does it mean? We're going to talk about application here in a little bit, but you got to start asking those questions of, what does this mean? What did he mean by this? When the author says X, what does he mean by X? Okay, and how does that fit in the overall pattern of the book. And I think it's at this point you begin to realize the benefit of study, because now you're getting more out of it. And sooner or later things begin to get a little bit different and go forward. And so you begin to understand, hey, this is what this guy is really saying, or what this gal is really saying. And I think that's an important step in moving forward from just reading books to studying them. I had to really take a look at this, and this is a little commercial in the middle of my presentation here. But the idea, I really had to take a look at this last year, because I was reading books, but I wasn't really getting anything out of them. See, because up until now, with the observation and the interpretation, you're studying the book. Okay, well now we're going to talk about application. And one of the third step is application. Okay, so I apply this. What does this mean to me? Okay, how do I benefit from this knowledge? How do I personally benefit from this knowledge? Okay, what are the things that I can put into my systems, my routines, or just into my life in general that this book is telling me that can help me out? And I think a lot of people miss this step, and they want to impress people with how many books they read. And that's great. Reading a lot of books, it can teach you a lot. But what are you really learning from this book? What are you really getting out of it for yourself? You really have to ask yourself the question of application, because application is where you specifically say, I'm going to do A, B, and C now because of this book. Okay, now I'm not telling you to turn any book into the authoritative word of whatever. Okay, I don't believe in that anymore. If you feel in your application process that you're looking at, this really doesn't apply to me, or I get these things, but these things over here this author says, I think that's nuts, and I'm not going to do that. Okay, you're free to do that when you apply things to your book, a book to your life. You can make your own judgment calls as to whether or not you want to take a book and apply it to your life, okay, and what parts and areas you want to apply. So don't feel bad about that. Don't feel like, oh well, if I'm going to study a book like this, I really need to apply all of it to your life. It doesn't work that way. In fact, on this channel, we'll do a lot of books that are self-improvement type books, and I'm telling you that almost every one of these authors in their preface is like, take the parts that work and discard the parts that don't. Okay, so you have that aspect of it where you can, given permission by the author usually, to just take the parts that work for you and don't use the rest. Now the last stage is something that, a lot of us don't do, and that's contextualization. The fourth step is contextualization. This is also about applying the book. How does this fit into what I already know? Okay, how does it mesh? Okay, how does it work? I know this thing, and this thing from living life or reading this other book. How does what I've learned now that I want to apply to my life fit into whatever else thing that I know or have already applied to my life? And this is an important step, because sometimes you'll discover that as much as you want to take this part from the book and put it in your life, it doesn't really fit with what you already know or what you already think you understand. And either you're going to have to change your understanding or come up with a new understanding. But contextualization and bringing things together is, okay, what do we already understand? And this gets particularly important if you read 2 or 3 books by the same author. You may discover that if you put the books in order that they were published, that he or she has changed the way they look at the world over time, which most of us tend to do. Most of us don't keep the same philosophy over time. And so that's kind of the way I think to look at contextualization is, hey, this person changed their view. Why did they change their view on this? And the thing about this is, a lot of people ask why study. Well, if you want deep knowledge on a certain topic, you have to study it, okay? You can either settle for the knowledge that is this broad, 3-foot deep pond that's 100 miles wide, or maybe you have a more concentrated aspect of knowledge where you have a very deep view of knowledge and what things are in there that you want to do. And it's a deep, you got 100-foot deep pond that's only maybe 20 feet wide, but you really know that topic. And that's, I think, more impressive to people, that you really understand something and get it, okay, rather than just knowing a lot about a little different, knowing a little bit about a lot of different topics. So to me, study, and you can do this with fiction or nonfiction too. Fiction is a little bit difficult because, well, it's not as difficult because you're going to outline the story, but then you're going to say, okay, what is the author trying to get through with this story? Is there anything in this story that I can apply to my life? Maybe there's a situation that I'm facing. The author, I realize fiction is fiction, but you not necessarily want to apply things to your life, but there's always a moral to the story. Is that moral applicable to me? Okay, and then, how does that fit into what I know about this author? If you're into a certain author, as a fiction writer, studying their works and understanding their works and understanding what they were trying to do through their works can be very enlightening. Just to kind of review here, remember, observe, what does it say? Interpret, what does it mean? Application, how does it apply to me? Contextualization, how does it fit into everything else I know? Hopefully this will be helpful as you go forward and look at books a little bit differently in the future and say, I read that book, but I don't really understand it. I think I'm going to study it and see if I can really understand it. And hopefully this has been a little bit helpful to you. This has been, of course, Simply Raby, and I'm your host, Ed Raby. I want to thank you all for stopping by. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe the video, and make sure you hit your notification bell. I appreciate any effort right now to make the channel grow, because we're really fledgling, and so anybody who shares my videos and helps me out, I deeply, deeply appreciate it. And thank you once again for stopping by, and you have a great day.